Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon or good evening, depending on what part of the world you are in at this moment. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Christopher Fletcher. I am the Assistant Director of the Center for Renaissance Studies here at the Newberry Library in Chicago. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to our conversation today, Adventures in Libraries, Thoughts on Epistemology. And I would like to begin by reading the Newberry Library's land acknowledgement. The Newberry Library are located near the confluence of several waterways. The Newberry Library sits on land that intersects with the Aboriginal homelands of several tribal nations, the Council of the Three Fires, the Potawatomi, Odawa, and Ojibwe nations, the Illinois Confederacy, the Peoria and Kaskaskia nations, the Miamia, Weya, Takiwaki, and Meskwaki nations. The Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Kickapoo, and Mascoutin nations also call the region of Northeast Illinois home. Indigenous people continue to live in this area and celebrate their traditional teachings and lifeways. Today, Chicago is home to one of the largest urban Indigenous communities in the United States, and this land remains an important place for Indigenous peoples. As a Chicago institution, it is the Newberry's responsibility to acknowledge this historical context and build reciprocal relationships with the tribal nations on whose lands we are situated. Thank you once again for joining us for this program. I want to just give you a few notes of how the program is going to work. To begin with, please submit your questions at any time using the Q&A function, which is located in the bottom menu of your screen. You may submit questions at any time, and we will get those to the speakers today. Also, I would like to encourage you, if you are so inclined, to use the chat function as a way to share comments, share ideas, or if you wish to share your own adventures in libraries, we would very much welcome you to do that. And now, I would like to formally begin this conversation on the present and future of manuscript studies. I am very grateful that we are joined by such a wonderful group of panelists, Ralph Hanna from Keble College in Oxford, Ian Cornelius, Tamar Evangelestia-Dougherty, Michael Kuczynski, Liza Strakhov, and J. Eric Ensley. I encourage you, if you'd like to learn more, to visit their faculty bio pages that you can find on the calendar page for this event, which we will put a link to in the chat very shortly. With that, I would like to hand things over to our moderator for today's proceedings, Ian Cornelius. Take it away, Ian.
Thank you, Christopher. It's really a delight to be in this room, as it were, for our conversation here today, where we're convened around Ralph Hanna's lecture, Adventures in Libraries, Thoughts on Epistemology, a lecture that has been in the past couple of weeks really an inspiration to me in its remarks on the epistemological significance of memory, on the importance of serendipity and staying with it. A lecture that stands out for me, and it's optimism in a time where that might seem to be in short supply. We will in the next couple of minutes hear from our four roundtable respondents. We'll go in the order in which we have respondents on the event announcement, and then we will hear from Ralph Hanna in his in responding to the roundtable panelists, and we'll open the conversation up for general discussion. So going in the order on our event announcement, Tamar, would you start us off?
Thank you for having me today. I'm very pleased to be on this panel. I'm a native Chicagoan and I love the Newberry Library. I've been actually doing research there since I was a child. And I'm going to share my screen. According to the theme of the panel, my adventures in libraries, with books and libraries, just where to begin. I've been in this profession for about 25 years, and I came to it through the community in Chicago, I grew up with a single mother. It was she and my brother. My brother was 15 years older than I. She had my brother when she was 15 years old and myself when she was about 30. And my mother did not have an education, so to speak. She got her GED, and the same with my brother. So I'm going to talk about sort of my navigation as a Black woman through the world of rare books and special collections and early manuscripts. And Ralph, the thing that resonated with me the most from your lecture was that books are embedded in communities. And I use that as the guiding inspiration for this little presentation. I wanted to start by inspirational words to live by. Whenever you don't feel beautiful, imagine your Grendel. And my brother said that to me once because my brother was a great lover of the story Beowulf. He was not an educated man, but for some reason, this story really resonated with him and the battle between, Grendel's mother. And I had an unfortunate hair accident when I was young. I was playing with chewing gum and it got in my hair and my hair had to be cut. And in the Black community, hair is really important. And my mom was quite embarrassed by me, and you can see me here holding a scarf in my hand that my mother gave to put around my head. But later, my brother, who's here, and my uncle Eugene told me to smile. You're always beautiful, and take the scarf off. But my brother also said, whenever you're not feeling beautiful, to pretend that you're Grendel, which was a fierce character. And so I sort of, live with that. And I wanted to say that there were no castles where we lived in the inner city of Chicago. My brother grew up in Cabrini Green, if any of you had ever heard of that. And just living with a single mother, the libraries and the Chicago parts were the kingdom where we felt safe. There were times when we fell on really hard circumstances where we were homeless. I once lived in Pacific Garden Mission, if any of you are from Chicago and remember that place. And they would ask us to leave the shelter in the middle of the day because we were supposed to be out looking for jobs. And sometimes when my mother was really depressed, rather than doing that, she would go to the Chicago Historical Society and we would just sit on the stairs there. And for those of you who are old heads in Chicago, you may remember the Putnam chains. In the 1970s, they were behind Chicago Historical Society. And my brother would come and he would tell me that these were the chains of Grendel. And I would play there, not knowing that within the building behind me was an archive, and that's what I would spend my career doing. This story of Beowulf and Grendel, I was always curious about books, and that led me as I think I was probably 10 years old when I looked in the encyclopedia to see what was the story behind that manuscript and the poem, and learned that it was at the British Library. And I always said to my mom, I really would like to go to the British Library someday to actually see this in person. And, she said, well, I think that could be, a goal for you going forward. I'm talking about another place that influenced me with early manuscripts was the Scheide Library at Princeton University Rare Book and Manuscript Library. Princeton was pivotal for me. It was the first special collections that I worked in. It had a significant rare book collection. And as everyone knows, they have the first 6 printed editions of the Bible. And there was a librarian there by the name of Paul Needham. He was called a Scheide librarian. And he didn't know me from anything. I was a reading room attendant. And whenever a Scheide book would get paged, I would always secretly kind of look at it. And I remember this one was the bloodletting calendar for Vienna, 1462. So I began to get it in my head that I wanted to be, like Paul Needham and become, someone who worked with early manuscripts. But I faced a lot of obstacles growing up in that. And I was told once that being a Black woman, you do not fit in the world of medieval manuscripts. You do not have the money or the European upbringing for that. And I'm juxtaposing these images of books from Scheide. There was Paul Needham, and I was kind of a stalker. I'm going to be honest about that, because I was just so curious about his work. And there's William Scheide, and I kind of put, you see behind me their African mask, which my family has collected for years. And how does that identity of mine fit in with this world? So I decided to fight and defy, what was said and expected of me. And I began actually going to the castles that were not around when I was growing up in Chicago. And this is one of my favorite trips, which was to Ireland, where I went to Blarney Castle, and I actually kissed a Blarney stone. I don't know how much grace or elegance it gave me, because that's what you're supposed to be bestowed with when you kiss the Blarney stone. But I do know I received strep throat after actually kissing it. And the man who's holding me told me, well, you weren't supposed to actually put your lips to it. I didn't know that, but that's what I did. And, it was just a guiding force in my life to overcome, I guess, the identity that people had of me. I don't have to identify with what someone expects me to be. So I decided to be the best that I could in this world. And, I kind of say this is me when I was only 17 years old. How to pick your battles when you want to achieve something that someone says you can't. And, is it intellectually pleasing? I love manuscripts and communicating why they're important. Is it achievable? My goals have to be realistic. No, I didn't grow up in Europe. No, my family was not rich, but I could go to rare book school at the University of Virginia, and I could take classes with Barbara Shaler, and I could, take classes in paleography. And I became a curator at Columbia, where Consuelo Doitsky was, and was there when Digital Scriptorium was being created, and kind of just live vicariously through that. And you also have to modify the plan as needed. Sometimes you have to stray from your chosen paths. I think as we have all been in this journey of working with books, there may have been aspirations we had that maybe, we had to kind of tweak and know your strengths. And one of the strengths I think I had was I am an incredible fundraiser. I love being an administrator. And so I kind of channeled that to show how I could bring that love of early manuscripts to curators who do have the skills to do those things. I was a curator, but it was in political history. And I think when you're looking at this woman standing by the locker, with her mini skirt from the 80s and bushy hair, I was channeling Madonna that day, by the way. You never would have looked at me and thought that this is going to be an associate university librarian of Cornell. So my adventure today is sort of illuminating manuscript culture to our youth of color. I think it's important to connect these texts with children who may not necessarily come into contact with them. How we do that is going to take an amount of concentrated effort on our part. And we have to have the purpose of remembering that early manuscript culture is inclusive of a global history. One of my favorite people is Iyab Dirello, who's at the British Library, who talks about Ethiopian manuscripts. And recently in a Cornell podcast, I invited him. And Derek Spires, a professor here at Cornell, is someone who really talks about print culture. I think this can be done. I'm also pleased to say the Digital Scriptorium is kind of widening its scope to include manuscripts of the East. And so that's one of the goals that I have. And, where I am today, I'm at Cornell, and I'm promoting, manuscript culture there. And this is me with some officers from the Milstein Foundation showing our wonderful Asian rare manuscripts and trying to bring more elevation to those. And my motivation is always going to be research and learning. Recently, as Ian said to me once he saw that I was on the digital scriptorium, um, it was a board meeting where I was presenting a manuscript that we have in the Cornell collection. And you see here, one of the things I actually do in my spare time is I bring the world of rare books to K through 12. I don't think we do enough of that in this field. And it's not always them coming into our spaces. We have to go into the children's spaces. And that is just the scroll. And Ian, that's for you. Because you said it was so, you really liked it a lot. The interesting thing about the scroll was that it came to Cornell in a cocoa tin, which Cornell still keeps as part of its provenance and identity. And that's just my last slide. This is my class at California Rare Book School. Bringing them into spaces to talk about administration of ethnic heritage libraries. And the hardest thing has been for me with that class is getting someone to speak to them about early manuscripts, because when I first say that my class is about ethnic and cultural heritage institutions, I'm always asked, where does that fit in? Where do the early manuscripts fit in? So there are still barriers that I'm trying to bring down. Thank you.
Tamar, thank you so much. Thank you for the personal history and the account of your mission in the libraries and the view, a second view of that wonderful Ethiopian scroll in its cocoa tin. So many histories intersecting there. Our next speaker, Mike, would you take us forward?
Thanks so much, Ian. Let me get my screen share up here, and thanks so much, Tamar, for starting us off on such a powerful note. Let me find my PowerPoint. Just bear with me. I'm not the most tech savvy person. There we go. So I have some prepared remarks, and I wanted to thank Chris Fletcher as well for getting all of us together. This is a lot of fun, and one thing we need during the time of COVID is some kind of pleasant release, and it's great to be here with everyone. In addition to a long friendship, Ralph and I share an interest in connections between medieval Latin and vernacular religious manuscripts, and to a lesser extent, early printed books. Among Ralph's remarks, I was struck by his comments on visual memory, an indispensable tool in the paleographer's kit, which enables him to connect by way of imagination widely dispersed materials from disparate archival collections. Moving down the hierarchy of senses, I'd like to add another complementary tool to that kit, tactile memory. I wanted to be a sculptor when I was young, and sculptors believe in something they call truth of material, that the identity of an artwork is inseparable from the matter of which it is made, clay, steel, stone, or wood. So too with medieval texts. Their media is the message. I'll never forget how, as a graduate student in 1984, I got to lug all 56 pounds of the Bodleian Library's Vernon manuscript to its special reading stand in the Selden end of Duke Humphrey Library. Vernon, as some of you know, is a massive trilingual anthology of 14th century didactic verse and prose. Turning its stout leaves, I started to develop some muscle memory for the art of medieval devotional reading. I came to understand that the Vernon lyrics, for example, which you can read conveniently enough in modern anthologies, lose much of their sense in that context, their physical character on the page, carefully copied and surrounded by other texts. Like all of us, I've had to depend during the COVID lockdown on electronic images for my research. But each book, and indeed each parchment leaf or incunable page in a book, is a unique three-dimensional form. Accessing them on a computer screen, where the peculiar sizes and textures of sheets are reduced to digital flatness, limits our understanding of what medieval books can teach us. What matters in my research is material. Codices and fragments of codices, large and small, hard and soft, heavy and light, stiff and limp, ornamented and plain. They are the rock against which, like Dr. Johnson, I strike my foot in order to refute subjective, idealized abstractions about reality, my own and other people's abstractions about the Middle Ages. As Ralph reminds us, epistemology is all about how we know what we know, and whether indeed it's even possible, given the paradox of knowing what we don't know. Any medievalist who works with manuscripts assumes that there's a lot she or he can't know, simply because it no longer survives, or has yet to come to light. Serendipity, as Ralph says, is key. One of my first publications involved a banged up workshop copy of Nicholas of Lynn's Calendarium, a medieval astronomical text known to Chaucer that the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill acquired when I was a student there. This copy wasn't known to the late Sigmund Eisner, the editor of Nicholas's text for the Chaucer Library, since it had been in private hands and was inaccurately cataloged for auction by Sotheby's. When I discovered that the Chapel Hill copy contained variant calculations that undermined the classification of manuscripts in Eisner's brand new edition, SIG immediately helped me to get my research published. It was a remarkable feat of scholarly generosity, putting the rock before the abstraction, as it were, material truth before interpretation. Recently, I published with the Early English Text Society a 2-volume edition and study of a Wycliffite Psalter with expansive Middle English glosses. I first worked on the base manuscript, MS Bodley 554, during the early 1990s while writing a critical book about Middle English treatments of the Psalms. But I couldn't forget the density of its more than 1,300 annotations, translated largely from the Latin commentaries of Nicholas of Lyra, a 14th century Franciscan Hebraist. Whoever made this book was fervent, even obsessive, about the literal and figurative meaning of the Middle English Psalms. The density of the glosses impressed itself on me especially because the manuscript is surprisingly light, weighing less than 2 pounds, a small quarto of 80 thin parchment leaves designed to be portable. Only after engaging for a long time the physical details of this idiosyncratic book could I ask myself more probing questions about it. Did the annotations cohere around certain themes? Were those themes Wycliffite? Who might have compiled and written out the glosses? Who might have read and used them? I began transcribing the glosses by hand with a pencil in notebooks, since I didn't at that time own a laptop. That discipline taught me more about the vagaries of scribal practice than I could learn while typing on a keyboard. In the many years I worked on my edition, much remained murky for me about this book, but other things became clearer, or I should say, posed clearer problems. Late in the project, for example, I suspected that B554 might have been written or used by a mendicant, a Franciscan, despite the well-known antipathy between Wycliffe, his followers, and the friars. This suspicion has led me, with the encouragement of Anne Hudson, to the works of an obscure Coventry friar, William Norton, who died circa 1403, around the time this manuscript was written, and whose major works are indexes to the voluminous biblical commentaries of Nicholas of Lyra. Scholarship is a pursuit. To complicate this pursuit further, our collaborators on it are often shades. Our eminent predecessors, such as Walter Skeet, a mutual hero of mine and Ralph's, and the lost authors and books that we seek by some form of exquisite conjuring to resurrect. We are always, in one way or another, negotiating with the dead. Pre-COVID, I spent a happy month adventuring in some Italian libraries I'd never visited before, in Venice, Padua, Florence, and Rome. I was on the trail of a brief Latin text that I first encountered in Brasenose Library in Oxford, the Epistola Lentuli, that purports to be an eyewitness account of the physical appearance and demeanor of Jesus Christ. The letter, which was known to the B554 glossator, was popular, translated into all the medieval vernaculars. Erasmus tried to debunk it, but its appeal lasted into the modern age for sinister, racist reasons that its first editor, the early 20th century German biblical scholar Ernst von Dobschütz, failed to explore. This letter, so called, is the source of most of our iconography of Jesus, depictions of him as fair-haired, blue-eyed, and of European rather than Semitic complexion. And on the right there is Surfer Jesus, as I call him, from a famous 1960s film, King of Kings. My investigations of the nearly 100 surviving copies of the Epistola, one of them a 15th century Italian translation here at the Newberry, have suggested a new narrative of its history as an imaginative biblical gloss on one of the messianic psalms, probably written by St. Anselm or someone in his circle, which was then incorporated into medieval chronicles as a quasi-factual account of Jesus, and next confabulated in the 15th century into a document sent to Pontius Pilate by one of his associates, the eponymous Lentulus, along the way generating these improbable portraits of Jesus Christ. Text became artifact. Artifact became art. The record of that process is fossilized in the mass of manuscript materials that I've been examining. By dint of hard labor, the scholar, like a sculptor, seeks to free from the durable rock of an archive the hidden form of history. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike, for that account of adventures in libraries, pursuing the durable form of history. Thank you. Liza, the podium is yours.
Thank you, everybody. Let me just pull up my PowerPoint here. One moment. There we go. All right. So, fun fact, I never actually intended to work with manuscripts coming into graduate school. My first adventure with a manuscript was quite literally happenstance, a true deviation from a seemingly straight and narrow, obvious path into that wonderful equivalent of the charmed forest in medieval romance, the library. I knew I wanted to study Chaucer and his French contemporaries. So, working on my dissertation proposal in my 4th year, I came across a chapter in a book by James Wimsatt on a fascinating sounding manuscript of French poetry with all sorts of productive connections to my research. And the call number was University of Pennsylvania Van Pelt Library, Special Collections, MS French 15. Huh, I said to myself. Well, I'm in University of Pennsylvania's Van Pelt Library. I have a free afternoon. I walked over to the elevator and I took it 5 floors up. I spent the next 6 months, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday in special collections, teaching myself paleography and codicology. Fast forward 9 years, I have just finished my first book on, among other things, that fateful Penn manuscript, Gower's Trentham manuscript, Hawcleave's Huntington holographs, and the full corpus of 15th century bibliophile John Shirley's compilations. I'm a senior fellow and a diversity and outreach coordinator for the Andrew Mellon Society of Fellows in Critical Bibliography, and I teach history of the book at Marquette. And one of my students has just been accepted to the Newberry's inaugural undergraduate seminar on book history. So some adventures, it turns out, become our entire lives. My talk is more of a response to Ralph Hanna's work as a whole, which I have been drinking from deeply over the years. His work on miscellanies and anthologies and booklets in particular has just been truly transformative for me, and it's such a pleasure to be on this roundtable. My abiding interest in manuscripts for several years now, inspired by Hanna's work, lies in the seemingly random scribal asides, marginal comments, rubrics, and other moments so easy to overlook that turn out to be powerfully condensed responses to complex, multi-layered cultural and socio-political phenomena. Allow me to give one example. Harley MS 7333 is one of 14 extant manuscripts of Chaucer's Parliament of Fowls. This allegorical dream vision, in which the dreamer encounters a large assembly of birds choosing their mates on Valentine's Day, ends with the birds singing a lyric, for which the note or music, "Imacid was in France," was made in France. But the full text of the bird's lyric, as edited in the Riverside Chaucer, is actually only found added in a later hand in a different manuscript. One manuscript cuts out a line, 2 have fragments, 2 omit it, and 3 replace it with a popular French one-line proverb. In Harley 7333, something still stranger happens. The scribe copies the Parliament of Fowls down to line 679, where the lyric is first mentioned. Instead of the lyric and the poem's final stanza, however, there are 11 lines of blank space followed by this text. Meester Geoffrey Chaucer's that now lith grave, the noble rhetor poet of Great Britannia, that worthy was the laurer to have of poetry and the Palmatena, the gold dew drops of speech and eloquence, and to English tongue thorough his excellence. This turns out to be by someone else. Namely, it is a passage from Lydgate's Life of Our Lady. At the conclusion of the Lydgatian lines, a rubric announces the beginning of the next text, which is Chaucer's Complaint of Mars. As a result, Lydgate's praise of Chaucer visually functions like the ending to Chaucer's Parliament, conceptually replacing the French rondeau. The same move is made starker in Trinity R319. Here, the lyric text is substituted by that aforementioned French proverb. It's garbled here, but it's "que bien aime tard oubli." The scribe then proceeds with the final stanza of the Parliament of Fowls, but instead of ending the work right there, he adds the rubric verba translatoris, words of the translator, followed by that same extract from Lydgate. The second rubric makes the Lydgate passage look even more like the concluding stanza of Chaucer's Parliament, particularly since translated texts often feature a closing stanza from the translator that is marked off in this way. This wording is odd. Not only is Lydgate not discussing translation at all, but Lydgate also manifestly did not translate Chaucer's Parliament of Fowls, nor is the Parliament of Fowls known to be a translation in the first place. Finally, we notice that the verba translatoris rubric is identical in letter size, color, and placement to the French proverb standing in for the bird's French lyric. The visual similarity links the French phrase to the Latin rubric of Lydgate's laureate praise of Chaucer at the end of Chaucer's text. These two strange scribal moments are an especially defamiliarizing context for the actual content of Lydgate's text. Just before these lines, Lydgate mournfully evokes the deaths of Petrarch and Cicero with their Rhetorica Sueta before expanding on Chaucer's own death. Lydgate portrays Chaucer as the direct successor of antiquity and of the famed Italian poet Petrarch, who was crowned laureate in 1341. These manuscripts' presentation of the ending to Chaucer's Parliament thus collapse together several elements. A short lyric, underscored as importing its music directly from France, is visually joined to Lydgate's Italianate laureate praise of Chaucer through rubrics and mise-en-page that are also suggesting Chaucer's text to be some kind of an Anglo-French translation, and imagine Lydgate as a translator rather than an heir of Chaucer. So if you'd like to know why this happens, I rather shamelessly refer you to my book, Continental England, Form Translation and Chaucer in the 100 Years' War, forthcoming in early 2022 from Ohio State University Press. But the point I'm trying to make is this: Harley 7333 and Trinity R319 are weird late 15th century manuscripts of Chaucer's and Lydgate's work that are filled with such strange, easily overlooked scribal moments that Hanna has been drawing our attention to for years. Yet these two little pages manage to embed questions pertaining to scribal culture, authorship, canonicity, multilingualism, Anglo-French and Anglo-Italian cultural connections, and the constructions of Chaucer's posthumous fame. We don't just go on adventures with manuscripts. The manuscripts themselves are the adventure, and every manuscript page is a rabbit hole to fall through so deep, you never know where you will resurface 9 years later. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, for this for that account showing us the little details of translation and misattribution in weird books. Thank you. Eric, would you take us forward?
Absolutely. Let me take a second here to get my PowerPoint up. Let's see. Can everyone see that okay? Great. All right, so I will keep my remarks pretty short so we can get to the conversation at the end. But I just wanted to say how wonderful it is to see the sort of experiential and research come together in these talks. That's been a really wonderful thing this morning. So I'll say first off, what a joy it is to be here to talk with Ralph, Hanna, and this amazing group of people. Thank all of you. There are so many points in Ralph's talk that we could dwell on for the full hour, so I'll try to limit myself to one or two of his ideas. Echoing throughout his lecture is an exhortation to respect our scholarly forebears and to celebrate the serendipity that brings us and these material objects together. Such serendipity reminds me of probably the oddest provenance of any Piers Plowman manuscript, that of Beinecke Osborne FA 45, a 15th century fragment of a sea text. The manuscript was discovered in the mid-20th century when John Holloway, famed Cambridge English professor, had his floorboards torn up for a remodeling project. It is said history is right beneath our feet, perhaps not intended so literally. I just use the term serendipity, but really the word occludes all sorts of circumstances and, more importantly, labor that have allowed such objects to move from London to the floorboards of a vicarage through various collections to Bernard Quaritch and then to the Beinecke Library. It is noteworthy to me that Ralph thanked a librarian in his talk, something I have seen him do in print and speech numerous times. An acknowledgement of the labor that goes into making these items available, and a nod to the complex ecosystem of scholars, researchers, sellers, students, and varied staff, and yes, even carpenters and contractors who may have had a hand in bringing us these items. Perhaps it is appropriate, given we're orbiting around Piers Plowman here today, that we discuss issues of labor in books. Who does it, when, and where? We're here today to talk about the present and future of manuscript studies. The peculiar interconnectedness of texts and books reflects communities of labor going back hundreds of years. How else do you arrive at early modern books in the fields of Illinois? These may seem like generalized platitudes, but I wish to drive at a question concerning the future of manuscript studies based on its past labors. As the youngest, career-wise anyway, of any participant on this roundtable, My question is, what does the future of manuscript studies look like for those who might wish to pursue careers in librarianship, curation, and book studies? I fear for many, the gates appear to be closing. And there are glimmers of hope, of course. Laura Ash's work to expand admissions places for low-income students at Worcester College, Oxford, along with some of us attempting to get non-traditional students into special collections early in their careers. And here I'll say that I just really applaud Tamar's work. You know, I also grew up with a single mother below the poverty line in Appalachia. And when I arrived my first year at Columbia, I was told point blank after receiving a C on my first paper that some people just don't belong here by a professor. And even then, we weren't brought into special collections until my senior year. And I guess part of my question is, how do we get students to these items earlier? And to see K through 12 students seeing these items is something remarkable and wonderful. So if I might be allowed a question for the table, how do we facilitate the next generation's interest with manuscripts and help them learn the skills to work with them? I don't wish to end my point with doom and gloom. We were asked to talk about some of our adventures in libraries, and the greatest adventure I've had as of yet was curating with other graduate students the 150-item 2017 Beinecke exhibition, Making the Middle English Manuscript, which was in celebration of Toshi Takemiya's collection of medieval books. And put up my, let's see. There we go. So for all involved, the experience was a reminder of the intensive labor a library requires of janitors, conservators, curators, docents, security guards, graduate students, undergraduates, sellers, donors, scholars, and the list goes on and on. A book never just springs from beneath the floorboards of a vicarage. There must be a carpenter to pull it up, an appraiser or curator to identify it, a cataloger to make it accessible. I today sit here as a curator of a marvelous collection at Iowa, but like everywhere else, this collection is made possible by staff. And here I just wanted to share a couple of my favorite manuscripts from the Beinecke exhibition. Ian will be very familiar with the item on the right as we're preparing an edition of it for the Pierce Plowman Electronic Archive. And the item on the left sort of recalls to me the issue of forebears and how do we represent forebears. We have the item, The Roll of the Battle Abbey, which would typically be presented in scroll form or roll form, presented here in Codex. So again, my question is how we should train for the next generation, not for those who want to study books, not only for those who want to study books as scholars and professors, but also those who seek their task as auxiliaries to this research. What do we want the future to look like and how can we make it sustainable? Ralph, in sum, you made the point that we stand on the shoulders of our scholarly forebears. And I'd like to thank you for all the printed wisdom you've published over the years. A mentor of mine once remarked jokingly that it occasionally feels as if you found something truly groundbreaking in a manuscript, only to turn over the next leaf and find a note that says, Ralph was here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric, and thank you to all of our panelists this morning or today. We've heard about books embedded in communities, about visual memory and strange histories of transmission, weird books, public education, and labor. Ralph, Hanna, I turn the floor over to you for your thoughts in response to the respondents. Oh, and remember to unmute yourself. It was unmuted briefly and then muted again.
Okay, great. I want to take up with the first and the last speakers, Tamar and Eric. Eric, you really ought to know that I was the first person to own that manuscript after Holloway. Then went to Scoian and then to Mother Yale. I want to take up with Tamar and Eric's point about communities. And first of all, I want to apologize for the rudeness that you both experienced along the way by people who thought they should be doorkeepers of some sort or other. Largely because it's your experience is everybody else's in some way. All of us start by being thoroughly alienated from this kind of study. You know, looking at medieval manuscripts is not a natural act. I grew up in a small town in central Texas. I was and I spent a lot of time with myself, largely because I lived much of my youth with people who were 60 years older than I was. Didn't have a lot of time for me. And so I read a lot and got fascinated with a variety of subjects. Africa, the medieval, archaeology, natural history, and so on. And the medieval stuff was rather interesting because I had no idea how people found out these things they told you as facts, and no notion of how you might find out. The idea that there actually was something medieval that still survived in the modern world somewhere was totally foreign. So that we, you know, we all start in a position in this field of thorough ignorance. I was I think 22 years old before I handled anything that looked like a manuscript. It was a century deed. You know, but so that it's, you know, it's important to be welcoming and to you know, understand that everyone comes from the same private and ignorant condition. The other thing I'd say to take up both those speakers, it goes quite against the grain because I'm renowned as a Luddite. But the one thing I would point out is the computer. It doesn't give you physical access, but it damn sure gives you visual access. And in thousands and thousands of places, simply to take a great starting point, just go to eBay and stick medieval manuscript into the search engine, and you'll be amazed at the stuff that comes up. Most of it at prices you probably should ignore and let their owners view them as investment opportunities. But the internet and the computer itself are a wonderful way into this, and in a way that's increasingly you know, sort of democratically approachable, because nearly everybody has an iPhone except me, of course. Nearly everybody has an iPhone, and they can get onto the internet that way. And you can carry a medieval manuscript around in your hand if you want. And I mean that's enough to be stimulation. And indeed, the internet is enough to do, as I'm finding out in COVID, a fair amount of decent research with, in fact, images from manuscripts. I mean, if you want something that's a little more organized than, you know, eBay, go get into Parker on the web, the library at Corpus Christi College, Cambridge, which is now in public domain. Images of every book in one of the most important libraries in the English-speaking world. Particularly if you're interested Grendel. If you're interested in Old English books, although the part somehow the Beowulf manuscript escaped the clutches of Matthew Parker, the collector of the Corpus Christi Library. But the other thing is to take up Eric's point about the future of computers, data banks, and so on. One of the great ways forward. They're very, very tricky. I'm just reading a book by someone who's trying to do manuscript studies with a large computer base. This is, I'm afraid, an Italianate specialty. And the point is they got a lot of data. They got no idea what questions to ask about it. So that's a question that gets into technology. You can't just count these babies, okay? But the thing that intrigues me particularly, because much what I've done recently is book collection cataloging. Manuscript catalogs are, of course, bad substitutes for physical presence. M.R. James was the greatest cataloger probably of them all, did all Cambridge libraries, at the University of Aberdeen, he did Lambeth Palace and so on. Wrote in his introductory notes for students of manuscripts, never trust what a cataloger tells you. You know, you got to handle it for yourself. But catalogs are capable of being much better experiences than they currently are in the form of large print books with glossy pages, because of the possibilities of hyperlinkage and so on, ability to give vast numbers of images, to give kinds of detail that traditional manuscript cataloging doesn't give, to offer much more extensive bibliography and links and so forth. And again, because they are going to be online things, they again open out what might be thought to be a thoroughly recherche kind of area. I don't know. I hope that's something that'll get some discussion rolling.
Thank you very much, Ralph.
Mm.
We have a question from Megan Heffernan that I'd like to, I think, pose to our full panel. Megan Heffernan has written in as questions, especially for Tamar. She writes that I love how you take Ralph's focus on medieval textual communities and extend it to the modern library. And then a key question, as a librarian on the panel, do you have advice on creating communities of collaboration between libraries and universities? I think that's actually a question that applies to the librarians on the panel and the non-librarians. So I wonder if that's a question that we could take up. Yes, Tamar.
I think you have to, be very aware that, a lot of times when we think of outreach, it's passive outreach, and we tend to let people come to us. And I think when we're talking about, a thing that I think Ralph means is, the books, our communities, we have to go outside of that comfort zone of the university. And I'm talking about beyond town and gown. You kind of have to get down, into it. And one of the things, I do want to say this, despite my talk, there were people that I would encounter in the early manuscript community who I think were very embracing of me. When I took the course with Barbara Shaler at Rare Book School, I remember her giving me the thumbs up when I was able to identify Gothic text versus, Carolinian text. And, she said, you can do it, because I felt I had imposter syndrome. I was the only brown person, in the class. And I was letting that, I guess, inferiority within me, setting myself up for failure. And Barbara was just so open and helped me break that down. And also, you know, another person who I actually see is in the attendance is Gregory Pass. I encountered him several times at Rare Book School, and was just so intimidated when, you know, one day it was a bunch of us, and he's like, you want to go to dinner? And you remember the old Rare Book School days, we would go for the booksellers night and get together for dinner, and they were just people. And, you know, we have to be our authentic selves when we're doing this work. And I think it's not about rectifying the past, it's just about having that knowledge of doing better. And putting ourselves, you know, in their shoes. I think when I think of what I would have been like had I been introduced to these things a lot earlier, you know, when I was maybe 6 years old or 7 years old, who knows, you know, what I could have done. And so I don't think it takes a lot for us to set up classes with our local schools. At Columbia, Consuelo Doitzky actually would have a program with the children in the Morningside Heights schools where they would create an illuminated manuscript, just using tea and coffee stains to create that look of the paper. So, you know, it can be done. We just have to add a little bit of altruism to what we do.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Mike and Eric.
Yeah, I had a response to what Tamar was talking about. We have a program, and I was fascinated by your outreach initiatives. We have a program at Tulane called Archives and Outreach, and we have a local high school that we partner with, a public high school, not a private high school. And you know, we first go to those students with something we call the Rare Book Mobile. So we bring rare books to them. And and our great collaborator here is the library and special collections. You know, initially people in special collections were worried about the safety of these materials in the hands of high school students. And I looked at this one sub-librarian one day and said, look, you know, you just don't have enough experience watching professionals manhandling these materials. I'll bet these kids are, you know, going to be, you know, so much in awe of and so respectful toward these materials that we won't have any problem. And that's exactly what happened. And it's been a great success locally here, you know, with the local community. They, you know, I mean, the kids have been great, and some of those kids have, you know, have now become students at Tulane. They would never have thought about applying to and attending Tulane if they didn't have this connection through this program. Our other partner in the program, you know, is the very well-known Amistad Research Center, and you know, we've run all kinds of interesting programming with them in the local high school, with you know, the papers of poets like County Cullen connected with the Harlem Renaissance, you know, laying those materials alongside rare medieval materials on the same table. And it's really been, I mean, it's renewed my faith in the future of manuscript study. And then just very quickly, you know, people were talking about their autobiographical backgrounds. I grew up in a lower middle class family. My dad was a tool and die worker who had to leave high school. You know, he had to drop out of high school to support his mom and 3 sisters. My mom was a secretary. So I remember going to my dad and saying, you know, I want to be a sculptor, Dad. He said, oh no, yeah, I don't think so. I said, okay. I said, I'll find something else to do. And then, you know, I started like Ralph reading about the Middle Ages, and I went back to my dad. I said, Dad, I'm going to go off and study English. He said, but Mike, you know English. I said, I'm talking about medieval English. And he said, that's great. So that's how I started working on what I work on today. You know, it's
my parents, Mike, did everything they could to dissuade me from going into English literature, including having told me that they'd never support me if I stayed in the state of Texas, trying to force me to go to the University of Texas Law School.
Well, I had to be a janitor in college to pay my tuition because my parents couldn't afford to pay my tuition. And I had to live in their house for 4 years and be a janitor, getting up at 4:30 in the morning. My Tulane students love hearing that story.
Lisa, and back to Eric.
I think Eric was first, and then
Okay. Yes.
I'm just going to second what Michael says. Whenever you get first-year students into the library, you can bring out your rarest manuscript and they'll be very gentle, very gently touching it. They're almost scared to. And then you'll see the emeritus professor over there, licking his fingers to turn the pages and you're like, oh my gosh. But I'll say that, as the other librarian on this panel, I keep saying that the curatorial role is as the conduit. And it's as a conduit between various communities here on campus. And, whether that's students to the collections, but it's also between the librarians and the faculty on campus. And I think part of that is that we need to start building communities with each other where we tell each other what we do. And that is going to involve reaching out from both sides in terms of librarians going in and as Tamar says, to showing what we do and the kind of how the sausage gets made in the library. And, most of us are working 50 or 60 hours a week to make this happen in libraries. It's a difficult, arduous job. But then also, I think there's another side to that where, the librarians have to kind of realize how research gets done and understand the processes that go into that. And that kind of mutual understanding is somewhere where libraries and researchers are going to have to start working together further, I think. And something that we're trying to do here is we have a first-year seminar series, and I'm happy to say that those start on the first week that students are on campus. And for the first time, we're going to have one based in special collections in the fall, where I and our outreach librarian will be teaching about special collections and what we do and talking about what is a book here on campus. And I'd love to see more of those sorts of getting students into the doors the very first week they're on campus and telling them that these books are there for them. And kind of trying to alleviate that alienation, as Ralph put it, is such an important part of what we can do.
Thank you, Eric. Lisa.
Just to sort of add on to everything. Well, firstly, to add on the autobiographical, as a Russian immigrant, also grew up below the poverty line in Boston, which is kind of a remarkable thing that this is kind of unites all of us on this panel, that we're all like not the standard person who's supposed to study medieval manuscripts, except that my parents also grew up below the poverty line, as did their parents. But my parents are from the Soviet Union. So they both have PhDs in and philology, because in the Soviet Union, wherever you grew up, you had access to an absolutely incredible public education system. And so those divisions of class they're more geographically based in the Russian world. But the point that I'm trying to make is that, one of the sort of the tragedies of the US educational system is, of course, the destruction of public higher education, and the amount of work that we need to do to rebuild, to try and stave off some of that destruction as much as we can. I love the idea of, I'm very inspired, Tamar, by doing some outreach into the K through 12 world, which I've not even thought of doing before, but I think that would be an incredible project to do in Milwaukee, especially, which is a city with a very sort of troubled public school system. But one of the things that I try to do in my own, I teach a lot of core courses, and I teach them all in the Middle Ages. I completely rejected the idea, and God bless my department for letting me do this. It's like, no, I don't want to teach a trans-historical class just because it's a gen ed class. I'm going to still teach it on the Middle Ages because mechanical engineers also love the Middle Ages. And so as a result, I have students from business, mechanical engineering, health sciences, exercise physiology. They love it. And I bring them to, we have the Tolkien materials at Marquette. Little known fact, Marquette holds the Tolkien archives. It's a very strange happenstance, but we have the full manuscripts of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. So I bring them there. I bring them to our museum, which is full of medieval manuscripts, and to our special collections, which we also have a huge collection of incunabula. And so what I'm just trying to do is just bring students from all of these different colleges within our university, and they're fascinated, right? And just so rather than say, okay, so I'm teaching an upper level seminar, so they should go to special collections, I'm actually just designed a history of the book class that's going to be, again, in the general education, in the Common Core program, to just get everybody working with rare books that I possibly can at the university. And that's what I'm just trying to do, is break down these disciplinary barriers just a little bit and remind, in fact, I think STEM students who work in labs are fantastic history of the book researchers, right? Because it totally makes sense to them. So just to add on to what everyone was saying.
Yes, Tamar.
Yes, Lisa, you're making me think a lot about history of science collections and drawing that with STEM. Cornell is the fifth Ivy I've worked at in the library. And one of the things I like about the collection that we have with Cornell, Cornell is a land grant institution and has a strong connection to engineering, veterinary science, and the STEMs. And I think that, we have to use our curatorial agency to think outside of the box in terms of looking at early manuscripts only going for humanities and the arts, and extend to those worlds. But Michael, I do want to say, to your point, I know Kira Olich, who's the director. We're good friends at the Amistad Research Center. Yeah, she's fantastic too. But also this idea of using early manuscripts in modern ways. We have a large hip hop collection at Cornell. And, I was having a good discussion with Erica Cree, our curator of Africana collections. What are the intersections between some pre-1800 manuscripts and hip hop? And that's something that could be a hook. For the younger kids to make that crossover into how can the lessons of Beowulf or something be learned in life today. We're going through a lot of racial and social unrest in the country. It would be really neat to point to something and manuscripts, that we find. And just the last point, we need to kind of get away from the curator as professional shopper, that we're buying things and they're kind of just staying on the shelves and there are trophies, but that we're not engaging them enough.
Right, I agree.
Yes.
So we, I think, announced this event as running for an hour, that is until 10 o'clock in Chicago time. I'm reluctant to leave a good conversation. And I wonder if we could take maybe one more question. And there's a question from Shannon Geik. Shannon has written in with a question I think is related to what we've been talking about, but extends it a bit. I'm curious, she writes, to hear your thoughts about partnering with amateur medieval enthusiasts. I ask because here at IU, we have an outreach program called Making a Medieval Book that we run at arts fairs that invites attendees to see parchment being stretched, write with a quill, make colors, sew bindings, and so forth. We have worked with our local rare books library, but also have drawn on local SCA folks to help with these things. But there's been some resistance towards this partnership from the professional medievalists in our community. So in short, I'm wondering if you all could muse on the relationship between professional and amateur engagements with book studies and how these contribute to the future of archival work. I think Ralph has gotten us started. Ralph, you've gotten us started thinking about this in terms of pointing us to the uses and democratic opening of the internet as a channel of communication and of visual access to materials. And we've also been sort of musing, thinking about post-vaccination and how these engagements can be made in person again afterwards. But I invite the panelists to comment on Shannon's question. Yes, Mike.
Yeah, we actually made some contact around the time we were starting Archives and Outreach with local medieval enthusiasts. I mean, people who, belong to groups like the Society for Creative Anachronism and whatnot. We made contact with them through an early music group called Musica da Camera, which is based in New Orleans, and they play public concerts all over the city, usually in churches or church halls. So our project was, like a lot of special collections, we have these leaves from old antiphoners and service books that have medieval, musical notation in them. So, we made a PowerPoint of these leaves and then gave photographs to this music group and asked them to play and sing this music on these old antiphoner leaves for the audience. And it went over very well because it made this connection between what was in the library and this public space where all kinds of different people, including, people from, who had a mild enthusiastic interest in the Middle Ages, came together with professional medievalists and just with members of the community. And some of those people wound up in the library asking for a tour. So we have cultivated some, by way of kind of creative events like that, some connections with that community.
Yes, Liza.
Yeah, Marquette and Milwaukee in general is really kind of is doing some really interesting stuff. The Tolkien materials are available for public viewing 6 times a year, which is really exciting. And people come from all over to look at them, sometimes over and over again. And we also have we have this amazing, we have a museum, the Haggerty, which is a teaching museum. We don't have an art history program, but we have a teaching museum that's also fully open to the public. So everybody teaches classes in the museum, and there's a special curator there who does work with Marquette students, but everything is constantly open to the public so that you can get so many more people drawn in. We just have like visitors walking around who kind of end up, sort of like listening in on classes as they're being held there, which is really great. And the final thing that Milwaukee does, which I think is truly remarkable, the Milwaukee Art Museum, but this is pre-COVID, but they'll start it up again soon. Every single month, the Milwaukee Art Museum hosts a giant party in the museum. That's like very low, it's like $7 to enter. Everybody from the city, all over, all different neighborhoods, everybody comes. It's one of the most diverse groups of people you can see in any given place in Milwaukee. And there's food and there's local vendors, art, etc. And there's a scavenger hunt through the collections. And so you get these laminated cards and you have to find all these things and you put in your completed card to get, for a raffle draw. And people, and so you go there, I go every month because it's wonderful. And you go there and you just see hundreds of people sipping wine, wandering around the collections and hunting things down, people who maybe would not have necessarily gone there before, and getting, just fascinated and returning again. And in this way, the Art Museum has built up this incredible community in the city that really reaches into all the different neighborhoods. It's really awesome.
Thank you. Eric.
Yeah, I do think there are so many opportunities there for reaching out to community members that may not be of our standard, when we do medieval research, that immediately leap to mind. I understand also the sort of pushback because the gradation from doing this sorts of reenactment into white supremacist activities, they are there. And you want to be careful to watch out for that. And also, as medieval experts, we want to be able to inject that with, what did the Middle Ages actually look like multiculturally? And there's been so much good research on that. I see Tamar has put Medievalists of Color into the chat there, which, yes. And I also would just say just to keep an eye on that. But the other thing too is that those experiential activities are so important. The first thing that I acquired for University of Iowa was a little Poissy processional. And we had plans in place to start making photocopies and bringing that to the music students and doing kind of an experiential, doing a processional that way. And that follows on the research done at like University of Bangor, where they're doing the Experience of Worship project, recreating medieval masses. And there is something, kind of an aura to that can be fascinating for many people. And I think that there's also a desire to be flexible and think beyond the bounds of our typical partners. So here at Iowa, we have a fantastic Center for the Book. And we end up with people using our materials for paper-making classes. That was the class that I actually was teaching 2 days ago. And I brought out an auto eggy portfolio. The papermaking people immediately said, we have never seen this before. What is this? This is incredible, to line up these pieces of paper and look at them and talk about what they were maybe made from, the processes that went into them. And the people that are taking these classes range from interested amateurs all the way up to artists who this is their passion and their profession. So I think thinking about those ways of reaching out as well, from amateur to professional, good way to go.
Thank you, Eric. Yes, Tamar.
I was I make paper. I used to go to take classes at Dudonnet in New York City for that. And thinking about I don't like the word amateur. I always try to get away from that. But Eric, you're making me think that even if someone is coming to this as a novice, I'll use that word. There may be aspects of the medieval texts like paper making that will appeal to someone that so everyone can feel that maybe they could be a little bit of an expert someday in some parts of it.
I'll say I learned from them too, when they were looking at some of the early sheets of paper and saying, well, this seems to have a high amount of flax in it because of the stiffness in it. And I'm just like, I had no idea that this was like this. And so just hearing what these papers were maybe composed of and the different parts that went into it. So it's kind of, again, that back and forth learning that happens with these sorts of classes as well.
Yes, Mike.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up quickly on something Eric said about, the danger of, what we do, not how we do it, but what we do intersecting with white supremacy. I teach a 1-credit freshman seminar every other year called Medieval New Orleans. And of course, Medieval New Orleans is about the 19th century medieval revival in New Orleans. And the Middle Ages was revived in places like New Orleans in the 19th century for very insidious reasons. And, we go on tours, around the city. We go down to Memorial Hall, which was erected. It's a Richardsonian Romanesque building that was erected as a monument to the Confederacy. And, we engage in a deep dive about the ways in which certain aspects of the Middle Ages were actively distorted and applied to, certain ideological programs. And mixed in there, we also talk about the way in which special collections developed at Tulane, where those books came from, where some of our medieval manuscripts came from. And, it's possible to engage in this kind of culturally reparative behavior, as a way of disabling this misuse of the medieval past.
I think one thing I'd say about that is that it's fine to do it with students, but I think you need to take it to public libraries.
Yeah.
Public libraries are always happy to have people give lectures on everything under the sun. Going to a public library and talking about, for instance, Viking research and how little it has to do with the public image of Vikings as, marauding white Germanic peoples.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a considerable amount of mileage in that really nobody takes up. I mean, I think there's a kind of danger in seeing people out there, and it's particularly dangerous in the US at this point with the bifurcation of public discourse, seeing people out there as only enemies, rather than seeing them as people who might respond to education at whatever level.
Thank you, Ralph. I think this is a very good place to end with an indication of the possibilities of education, and the recognition that the work that we do in libraries and around libraries is not separated from the great difficulties and challenges of our culture, including racism and inequality. Christopher, I turn the floor back over to you.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, everyone. First, I invite all of our attendees to join me in a virtual round of applause for all of our speakers today. This was a truly astonishing and inspiring event. And certainly what we hope comes of this is that this is the beginning of a lot of things, and that this conversation can help those of you here, those of you seeing this later on YouTube, to have your own adventures in libraries. And I say this also just to fit in with the theme as a product of a diverse public school without a sort of traditionally sterling academic representation. Shout out to Waukegan High School. But here I am getting to work with manuscripts and participate in this. So whoever you are, we encourage you to seek out your own adventures in libraries, especially as hopefully we are coming out of this COVID wilderness. And I must also put in a plug for the Newberry Library, which is and always has been open to the public. And we certainly hope to see any and every one of you to come there and see all of the medieval manuscripts that we have. But for now, I want to thank Eric, Ralph, Mike, Lisa, Tamar, and Ian for the wonderful conversation. Thanks to all of you for joining us. And we hope to see you all some other time when we can share more of our adventures together. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
everybody.
everyone. This has
Thank
been
you.
wonderful.